Okay, so I am using a different computer for recording, so I don't know if you can see me, but hopefully you can hear me fine. Let's see. So this is assignment 6. Let's see, I think that I should have this already pulled up for the first one. Yep, this looks right. So here, I'm just gonna run it to just show the output here. So the first one, we wanted to display this pattern. I started similarly to one of the example videos. So I started with the for loop that creates like all of the rows. So that's what this first one does, is it creates the rows. And then we have another for loop in it that goes through the content in each of the rows. So like it technically goes through like the columns. And for like, so we started at 1, and then we want the columns to be less than or equal to the row, because if it starts at 1, we want it to just go through one iteration, like one loop of it. Or if there's 2, then we want it to go through 2 times. So then inside of the loop, we have the initial condition up here, actually, that the number is 0. And so we're adding 1 to the number right here, and that displays it correctly. So since we're starting at 0, the first loop through here, it's displaying 1, and then since after that it gets adjusted, we go column plus 1, so that would be 2. And since row in the situation is 1, the column becomes 2, so this fails, and then we do a new tab, or a new line, and then it goes through again on the second time through the for loop. So at this point, row would be 2, and then for the first one we do, since the number is already at 1 right now, we're adding another 1 to it, so then that displays 2, and then then we add 1 to column, so then column is equal to row at that point, and so this condition is still satisfied. We go through it again, add another number on there, and then it just goes through that same process over and over again, where we go, row will go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and then for each one of those numbers it goes through this the same amount of times and just adds 1 each time. And I just realized, just to make it look a little bit nicer, I had edited this before but didn't copy it in, but we can add a space after that, just so in between each number then there's a little bit of a space and it's easier to see. So here we will just copy and paste that back in here, and then go through the next one. So then this is question 2, and this whole assignment is just making the patterns that are showed, or these kind of half pyramids that are showed in the description of the assignment. So for this one was a little bit trickier. There were a couple of different errors as I was going through it, but I was able to figure it out where we're starting, like we're doing a very similar structure as before. There are just like a couple tweaks. So for this one, I decided to, instead of counting up from 1 and then stopping when it got to 5, I'm going from 8 and counting down, and that's just so I can start. The way that I did it is, for each beginning of a row, I wanted it to display these numbers, and then I'm tweaking it off of that. So and I see that, it goes like 1 through 8, then like 9 through 15. I wasn't totally sure if there was a way to do it where I displayed it, just do like 1 through 8, and then next row it's like 9 through 15. So I found a pattern where like the first one is 1, of course, then we go up 1, and then it's the previous number plus 7, and then here it's the previous number plus 7 plus 6, and then plus 7 plus 6 plus 5. So that was kind of like the pattern that I ended up finding, and I based the code off that. So we start off with, of course, the rows. There's 8, so we're going from 8 all the way down to 1. The number that we're starting with, that we're going to end up displaying, is it's 9 minus the row. So if the row starts at 8, we're starting at 1. Same here, and then as it decreases each time, it goes 9 minus 7, then that'll get to 2 the second row, and so on throughout. So that's the first thing that happens in the for loop, and then we go to the second for loop. We are doing a similar thing with the columns. So, and I believe, so I did it like this because when we're starting at 8, and now that I'm looking at it, I realize I think I could have just started at 7 and not had to do the -1 here. But starting at 8, that makes it so I can add that to the number, or to the number that we had before. So like I said, we're starting with 1, and then we go back down through here, and since there's no other ones to display here, it just displays that and then adds the column to that -1. And then it gets just redefined up here, so that part doesn't really totally matter unless there was times going through this loop. So then for the second one, we start with 2. We enter this, and we'll end up going through it 2 times, since the row would be 2, or row would technically be like 7, so then it subtracts here. So then we go through, we print the first number, then we add column -1 to it, and then go back through another, like a second time, and then print that number that we made through the previous loop, and then going back, redefining, and then just going through that whole process however many times. I think it's like there's 8 different times going through this first for loop, and then of course it changes for the rest of them in here. And another thing, like before, we just do a tab at the end of every loop through this after putting everything like in the columns. I think that's it for this one. Oh, and then I can run it then to show as well. And I feel like I remember this one being slow before when I was trying, so I don't know if this will actually run. I might just stop it and then go on to the next one. Here, whatever you call it. Okay, and then we have our third question. And again, this one's in a little bit different format. Instead of doing numbers, we're doing characters. So here I'll just start by running it. And, you know, just looking at the two, they do look the same just right off the bat. So we start by defining characters and integers. For integers, we just want that for the for loops. And then the characters, we needed to define a space and a star, because those are the two that we're displaying here. So the first for loop, again, is just to create the different rows. And since we didn't need to base anything off of these, we just, here, let's see. Okay, so yep, here we're creating the rows, and then I ended up doing 2 different for loops in here. The first one is to create the spaces in the beginning, and then the second one is to display the stars. So here, for the spaces, this one was a bit easier to do. It's just you're printing out space for however many times we're going through this. So we want, let's see. So the way that I did it was I increased the row value, and then I based that for this part. I started at 5 and started decreasing. So we're starting, I think it starts where it's like 5, so it goes through 5 times as it gets subtracted, so it has to be either greater than or equal to. So then at that point where it gets subtracted all the way down to 1 and then 0, that's where it exits the loop, and it's already gone through 5 times then. And then we just print the space character as we go through that loop. And then once that loop goes through, once it prints the spaces for that row, we go to printing the stars. So for this one, I assume there's definitely some different ways to do it. But the way that I did it was I wanted it to go through and display a star for each like time that it goes through the loop, basically. And so I initialized it, started at 0, and then, let's see, we wanted to do, I don't remember exactly like the way that I kind of like got to this final thing. Basically, we're starting at 0, and then like adding 1 each time. But for the first loop, it just goes through 1 time, and then we want to do, we're basing it off of J, just since J is the one that, you know, like it is decreasing. So let's see, then we do like we want it to be less than or equal to 2 times J, and then once it no longer satisfies that condition, that it exits. So then that creates this pattern. Like there were a couple times that I tried it where it didn't have like this second half, but I ended up finding that made it so it displayed like the whole thing. And then of course once it's done going through these two, then we do the tab after each, just so it has that formation like there is in the assignment. And that is the end of assignment 6.